My name is Silas Jefferson. I am 72 years old, and for a long time I thought the battles of my life were over. I was wrong. My daughter's husband thought I was just a tired old man, an easy target whose life savings were his for the taking. He snuck into my bedroom while he thought I was sleeping, looking for the key to my safe. But what he found in my nightstand didn't just stop him. It shattered his entire world. I didn't call the police. Instead, I let him walk right into a trap that was 50 years in the making. A trap built not with locks and alarms, but with history and truth. Before I tell you how a pair of old military dog tags and a faded photograph destroyed a greedy man, I want to know how far my story has traveled. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and please hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that the quietest people often have the most powerful stories to tell. It all started a few days before that fateful night over a Sunday dinner that tasted of rosemary chicken and subtle poison. The aroma of the roasting bird filled my kitchen, a recipe my late wife Rose had perfected over decades. Every Sunday I cooked it. It was a ritual, a quiet way to keep a piece of her warmth in this house. My daughter Amara and her husband Chad arrived right on time, as they always did. Amara came in with a smile that could light up a room. She was the sun in my sky. She wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her hair. But when Chad stepped in behind her, an invisible chill seemed to follow him through the door. He gave me a hug too, the hollow, back-patting embrace of a performer. "Silas, you're looking sharp," he said, his voice as smooth as engine oil. "That chicken smells incredible. I could smell it from the street." I just nodded, welcoming them in. Amara moved around the kitchen with an easy grace, helping me set the table as if she had never left home. Chad, however, made himself comfortable in my favorite armchair in the living room, a subtle act of possession I had noticed long ago. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the mahogany furniture I had built with my own 2 hands 40 years earlier. "This house has good bones, Silas," Chad began, his tone shifting to that of a thoughtful appraiser. "You can't find wood like this anymore. It must hold a lot of memories, and a lot of value." The words hung in the air between us. It wasn't a compliment. It was a probe, a gentle but sharp drill bit looking for a crack in my foundation. I was placing the bowl of mashed potatoes on the table, and I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck. 72 years on this earth had taught me to read every shade and tone in a man's voice. I'd heard that same tone from white contractors in the 70s trying to cheat me out of a few $1,000s, from bankers trying to sell me a predatory loan as the best chance a colored man like me could get. It was the sound of greed, poorly disguised by a thin veneer of politeness. I turned, putting on the smile Rose used to call my political smile. "You're right, Chad. Everything in this house has value. But the most valuable things were paid for with sweat and honesty. And you can't put a price on that." Chad let out a laugh, a little too loud to be genuine. "You got that right. Honesty is everything." He raised his glass of iced tea as if toasting a successful deal. But I knew our conversation had just been a silent round in a fight he didn't know we were having. He had sent out a feeler, and I had put up a wall. The meal continued with a strained cheerfulness. Amara, my sweet girl, was completely oblivious to the quiet battle taking place across her dinner plate. She was deeply in love with Chad, a pure, trusting love that made her blind. She chattered on about her work at the art gallery, about a new artist she was excited to promote. I listened and nodded, but a part of my mind was always watching Chad. He ate mechanically, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the old oak cabinet in the corner of the living room. That was where I kept my important papers, the deed to the house insurance policies, old investment files. Then Amara, in her innocence, lit the fuse. "You know, Dad, Chad's car dealership has been a little slow lately. With the economy, people just aren't buying luxury cars." The atmosphere at the table instantly thickened. Chad's fork hit his plate with a sharp clink. "Amara, I told you not to worry about it," he snapped, the smile vanishing from his face. "It's just a temporary dip. Everything is under control." "I know, I'm sorry," Amara murmured, shrinking under his harsh tone. "I just thought maybe Dad could—" "Your dad doesn't need to do anything." Chad cut her off, his voice now cold as ice. He turned to me, forcing his smile back into place. "I'm fine, Silas. A man provides for his own family. I'd never want to be a bother." A bother. That word stung. I had paid the down payment on their first apartment. I had supported Amara through college. I had discreetly paid a few of their bills when I knew they were struggling. I never saw it as a bother. I saw it as love. But to Chad, my help was something else. It was a resource. It was an admission of his own failure. After dinner, while I was clearing the dishes, I could hear them whispering in the living room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the walls of this old house are thin, and Chad's frustration was not quiet. "Why would you say that to him? You make me look bad. Do you have any idea?" "I'm sorry." Amara's voice trembled. "I was just worried about you." "Well, worrying doesn't pay the bills, does it, Amara?" When they left, Amara hugged me again extra tight as if to make up for the tension. Chad just stood behind her and nodded at me, his eyes making one last sweep toward the oak cabinet. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my armchair in the dark staring at that cabinet. The unease in my gut grew into a heavy, cold knot. I missed Rose. She would have seen right through Chad from the first moment. "Silas," she would have said, "that boy's eyes don't smile with his mouth." Rose had an incredible instinct about people, an intuition sharpened by a lifetime in a world that wasn't always kind to a black woman. She was my moral compass, the one who told me when to trust and when to be wary. I built my entire career from a simple carpenter to the owner of a respected construction firm here in Atlanta, on a principle Rose taught me: watch what they do, not what they say. I had dealt with swindlers in expensive suits, with racists who would shake my hand with a smile while trying to sabotage my work behind my back. I knew the smell of a lie, and the scent coming off Chad Miller was getting stronger. He was a wolf, and my daughter was asleep in his arms. I got up and went to the window, looking out onto the dark street. Their car was long gone, but it felt like he was still out there watching, waiting. And then I realized what bothered me most. It wasn't just his greed, it was the condescension. In Chad's eyes, I was just a dying old black man sitting on a pile of assets he felt entitled to. He didn't see the man who worked 16-hour days, who poured his sweat and blood into building this life. He saw an obstacle between him and my money. That's when I heard it. A faint noise from the front yard. I turned off the living room lamp and peered through a gap in the curtains. A car I didn't recognize was parked across the street. Its lights were off. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. It could have been a neighbor. But my intuition, an old soldier that had been dormant for too long, was now screaming a warning. I stood there in the dark for 10 minutes. The car didn't move. Then my phone vibrated. A text from Amara. "Are you asleep yet?" "Dad, Chad says he's sorry for being grumpy at dinner. He's just been under a lot of pressure at work. He loves you very much. Good night." I looked at the text, then back at the mysterious car. My heart began to pound. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I decided to step out onto the back porch for some air to try and calm my nerves. The porch is private, screened in by a wall of bougainvillea that Rose planted years ago. And that's when I heard him, Chad's voice. He wasn't in the car. He was in my neighbor's backyard, hiding in the shadows of a large oak tree, speaking into his phone in a hushed, urgent whisper. He was just close enough for me to hear every word. "I know. I'm handling it," Chad said, his voice laced with irritation. "No, I didn't get anything. The old man is as sharp as a tack. But I planted the seed." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. "I know we're running out of time," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Look, I have a plan. The old guy definitely has a safe or something. His generation always does. I just need to find the key. It'll be fine. Just give me a few more days." A block of ice formed in my chest. Every doubt, every vague premonition was now confirmed. He wasn't just greedy. He was plotting, and he wasn't alone. "We," he had said, "we." I backed into the house as quietly as I could. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The betrayal was a bitter taste in my mouth. But underneath the pain, another feeling was rising. A feeling I hadn't felt in a long, long time. It was the cold, calm focus of a man preparing for a fight. Chad had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. He saw a 72-year-old man. He didn't see Silas Jefferson, the engineer who survived the most brutal construction sites, the man who had faced down men far more dangerous than him. The crack in my foundation had just become a chasm, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to let him know that I knew. I was going to build him a trap designed with the precision of an engineering blueprint, and when he walked into it, he would never walk out. The game was on. After I slid the glass door shut, the sound of the night was sealed away, but the echo of Chad's words remained bouncing off the silent walls of my home. My first instinct was the hot, immediate rage of a father whose child is in danger. I wanted to storm back out there to confront him in the dark, to see the fear in his eyes when he realized he had been caught. My hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white. I could picture the scene perfectly. His pathetic denials, his desperate lies. But then an image of Amara's face flashed in my mind, her trusting smile, her absolute belief in the man she married. If I confronted Chad now, what would happen? He would lie. He would twist my words. Paint me as a confused old man who misheard things in the dark. He would tell Amara I was trying to break them up out of jealousy or loneliness. It would become his word against mine, and in that battle my daughter's heart would be the only casualty. She would be torn apart, forced to choose, and the poison of doubt would ruin everything, no matter who she believed. I would not put her through that. I would not allow him to make her a victim of his war. The anger began to cool, replaced by something colder, heavier, and far more dangerous resolve. I sank into my armchair, the one Chad had sat in just hours before, and I began to think. I didn't think like a heartbroken father anymore. I began to think like the man I used to be. The engineer who designed foundations, meant to withstand earthquakes. The businessman who navigated the treacherous world of construction in the Deep South, a world where a black man's handshake was never enough, and a contract had to be as solid as steel. In that world I learned that you don't win by yelling louder. You win by being smarter. You win by anticipating your opponent's moves, by understanding his weaknesses, by building a case so airtight that by the time he realizes he's trapped, the door has already been locked behind him. My wife Rose always said, "Don't wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty and the pig likes it." Chad was a pig. He wanted a messy, emotional fight. He would thrive in the chaos of accusations and denials. I would not give him that satisfaction. No, I would not confront him. I would do something else entirely. I would build him a stage. I would write the script. I would hand him the props. And I would let him, with his own greed and arrogance, perform his own downfall for the world to see. He wanted the key to my safe fine. I would lead him right to it. I would let him believe he was winning. I would let him think I was the foolish old man he so clearly saw me as. And when he felt most triumphant, when his victory seemed certain, the floor would give way beneath him. It would be a quiet demolition, precise and absolute. The next morning I woke up with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The sun streamed through my window, but the light inside me was cold and clear. The plan I had formed in the darkness now seemed like the only possible path forward. It was time to set the bait. I waited until mid-morning, a time I knew Amara would be at the gallery and Chad would be between appointments at the dealership. I needed them both to be a little distracted, a little rushed. It would make my performance more believable. I picked up the phone and took a deep breath. I practiced in my head, letting a slight tremor enter my voice, adding a layer of tired vulnerability that would be music to a predator's ears. I was no longer Silas Jefferson the engineer. I was now Silas Jefferson, the concerned, slightly confused old man who needed help. I dialed Amara's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, Dad. Everything okay?" "Amara, honey, it's Dad." I began, my voice a little rough, a little hesitant. "Sorry to bother you at work." "You're never a bother, Dad. What's wrong?" "You sound tired." It was so easy for her to show concern, so natural. The thought of what I was about to do to her world made my heart ache, but it was a necessary pain. A surgeon's cut to remove a cancer. "Oh, I'm all right, sweetheart. Just old man's thoughts, you know." I let out a long, weary sigh, a sound I had perfected over the years to end boring phone calls. Now it was a tool. "You heard about Harold, my old friend from the fishing club, didn't you? He passed last week." "Oh, Dad, yes, I'm so sorry. I know you two were close," she said, her voice soft with sympathy. "Yes, we were, and his passing, well, it got me thinking. About, you know." I let the sentence hang, letting her fill in the blanks. "Getting my papers in order. Making sure everything is neat and tidy for you." "Dad, don't talk like that," she said quickly, a note of panic in her voice. "It's just life, honey. It's practical. The thing is, most of my important documents, the will, the insurance, the stock certificates, they're all in that safe deposit box at the main bank downtown. And to be honest with you, it's been so long since I've looked in there, I'm not even sure I remember everything that's in it. I let a note of manufactured confusion seep into my voice. My memory isn't what it used to be. That's okay, Dad. We can make a list together, she offered. This was my moment. That's why I'm calling baby girl. I was hoping... I don't feel too steady on my feet these days. Driving downtown, the parking, it's all a bit much for me. I was wondering if you and Chad might be able to drive me to the bank sometime next week. I'd feel so much better just laying eyes on everything, making sure it's all there. Of course, Dad. Absolutely. We can go anytime. Chad is here with me right now. We were just grabbing a quick lunch. Let me put you on speaker. I heard the fumbling of the phone and then Amara's voice, now more distant. Chad, it's my dad. He needs us to take him to the bank next week. And then I heard his voice dripping with a thick, syrupy concern that made my stomach turn. Silas, is everything all right, sir? I'm fine, Chad. Thank you for asking, I said, keeping my voice frail. Just an old man wanting to get his affairs in order. That's a very wise thing to do, Silas. Very responsible. He said, his voice a little too loud, a little too enthusiastic. You just tell us when and where and we will be there. We'll clear our schedules. Your peace of mind is the most important thing. I closed my eyes. The fish wasn't just nibbling at the bait. He was trying to swallow the entire fishing rod. Now for the final crucial piece. I chuckled a dry, raspy sound. Thank you, son. You're a good man. I'm just so forgetful these days. Sometimes I can't even remember where I put my reading glasses. I paused as if trying to recall something. Thank goodness I keep the only key to that box in a safe place. It's always right in my nightstand drawer next to my heart medicine. If I ever lost that key, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably have to call the president to get that thing drilled open. I made it sound like a joke, a moment of genuine age-related vulnerability. It was the detail that made the lie perfect. It gave him a target, a location, a plan. The silence on the other end of the line was only for a second, but in that second I could almost hear the gears turning in Chad's head. Then his voice came back smoother than ever. Don't you worry about a thing, Silas. We'll make sure you and that key get to the bank safe and sound. You can count on us. We'll call you this weekend to set a day. Thank you, both of you, I said, my voice thick with fake emotion. You've taken a great weight off my mind. We said our goodbyes and I hung up the phone. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the receiver cold in my hand. There was no joy in what I was doing. There was no satisfaction in knowing how easily the trap had been set. There was only a profound sadness, a sadness for my daughter who had given her heart to a man who saw her father as nothing more than a locked box to be cracked open. And there was a deep, chilling certainty. He would come for the key. He wouldn't be able to resist, and I would be ready for him. The first move of this game was complete. Now all I had to do was wait for his. As Chad's overly cheerful voice echoed on the line, a new thought, sharp and precise, cut through my mind. I had confirmed his intent. Now I needed to confirm his ignorance. I needed to know if he was just a common thief or if this was something deeper, a generational echo of a betrayal I thought I had buried half a century ago. It was time for one more test, a final probe into the darkness of his family's history. You know, Chad, I said, my voice taking on a distant, wistful quality. I was the old veteran now lost in a memory. Your willingness to help an old soldier, it reminds me of someone. Another young man from Atlanta, full of fire and ambition. Oh yeah, who's that Silas? He asked, the politeness in his voice barely concealing his impatience to end the call and start his planning. I paused, letting the silence stretch, giving the name the weight it deserved. A man named Robert Miller. Sergeant Robert Miller. He was your grandfather, wasn't he? There was a slight hesitation on the other end. Yeah, that was him, Chad said, a note of surprise in his voice. Wow, small world. You knew my grandpa. Knew him, son, for 2 years in the jungles of Vietnam. We were brothers. We shared sea rations, dug foxholes together, covered each other's backs when things got hot. I wouldn't be talking to you today if it weren't for him, and I'd like to think he'd say the same about me. This part was true. In the face of death, all other differences melted away. I let my mind drift back, pulling a specific memory from the haze. I wasn't just acting now. I was reliving it, and I let that genuine emotion color my voice. I remember this one time we were on a long-range patrol deep in the A Shau Valley. We walked into an ambush. It was chaos. Green tracers flying everywhere. Your grandfather, he was a firecracker. All instinct. He wanted to charge right into the thick of it. But I saw the trap. I grabbed him, pulled him back behind this huge banyan tree, and we held our ground until the choppers came. He had more courage than any 10 men your grandfather, but he was always looking for the shortcut, the quick, decisive victory. I was painting a picture for him, a picture of a brave but reckless man, a man who acted before he thought. And he was always talking about getting home, I continued, my voice a low murmur. He wasn't dreaming about a quiet life. Oh no. He had big plans. He had maps he'd drawn from memory of all the cheap land around Atlanta. He used to say, "Silas, when we get back, we're going to be kings. This whole city is going to be ours." He had a fire in his belly, that man. I had laid it all out, the connection, the shared past, the hint of his grandfather's ambitious, borderline obsessive character, now for the question that mattered. "He must have told you some of the old war stories," I said, my voice casual, almost an afterthought. Did he ever mention me, Silas Jefferson? We were going to go into business together when we got back. I held my breath. This was the moment of truth. Chad's response came without a second of hesitation. It was smooth, dismissive, and utterly, completely blank. Honestly, Silas' Grandpa Robert never really talked about the war. You know how that generation was. He always said it was a dark time best left in the past. He passed away when I was just a teenager, so I didn't get to hear many stories at all. Then he added the line that sealed his fate. But I'm sure he would have remembered you fondly. It's really something that you two served together. That was it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Not a flicker of recognition, not a hint of a story passed down through the family. The name Silas Jefferson meant nothing to him beyond being the father of the woman he married. The history between me and his grandfather, the betrayal, the lawsuit, the land, it had all been erased, buried. Chad wasn't just coming for my money out of simple greed. He was coming for it out of profound, arrogant ignorance. He was the product of a family that chose to forget its sins rather than learn from them. This knowledge didn't make me angry. It made me calm. It meant he was predictable. It meant my trap, the one he couldn't even conceive of, would work perfectly. He was a blind man walking toward a cliff, and he thought he was marching toward a gold mine. "Well," I said, letting a final sad sigh float through the phone, "the past is the past, I suppose. Thank you again, son, for everything." "Any time, Silas. You take care of yourself, you hear?" "I will," I said softly, a chilling double meaning in my words. "I most certainly will." I hung up the phone, and the silence of the kitchen returned, but it was a different silence now. It was the quiet of a perfectly calibrated machine waiting for the right moment to spring to life. The morning after the phone call, the house was filled with a quiet, determined energy. The game was no longer just in my head. It was time to move the pieces on the board. My first call was not to a friend or a family member. It was to my lawyer, David Hayes. The Hayes family and the Jefferson family went back a long way. David's father, Franklin Hayes, had been a young, razor-sharp lawyer fresh out of law school when he took my case in 1978. He was the only one in Atlanta who was willing to represent a black contractor in a contract dispute against an established white family. Franklin saw the injustice done to me by Robert Miller, and he fought with a brilliance that I had never forgotten. Now his son David, a man with his father's mind and a calmer demeanor, handled all my affairs. The Hayes family didn't just know my business, they knew my history. David answered on the first ring. "Silas, it's good to hear from you. I hope everything is well." "Everything is under control, David," I said, my voice steady. "But I have a sensitive family matter that requires your counsel. It involves my son-in-law, Chad Miller." I could hear the change in the atmosphere over the phone. David knew I was not a man who called over minor squabbles. He was silent, waiting for me to continue. I laid out the situation for him, not with the emotion of a betrayed father, but with the dispassionate precision of an engineer describing a structural problem. I told him about Chad's financial troubles, his probing questions, and the phone call I had overheard. I finished by telling him about the trap I had set over the phone just yesterday. When I was done, David was quiet for a long moment. "Silas," he said finally, his voice serious, "this is a delicate situation. What is your objective here? Is it simply to protect your assets, or is there another goal?" "My assets are already protected, David. You and I made sure of that years ago with the trust," I replied. "My goal here is truth. I want my daughter to see with her own eyes and without a shadow of a doubt the character of the man she married. I will not allow him to manipulate his way out of this with lies. I want his own actions to be the evidence. I understand, David said. A public demonstration. In that case, we need to ensure every step you take is legally sound. We cannot give him any grounds to claim entrapment or harassment. That's why I'm calling you, I said. He believes my assets are in the original safe deposit box at the downtown branch, the one I opened with Rose back in '85. Is his name anywhere on that account? David asked, his mind already working through the legal angles. No, only mine and Rose's. But his last name is Miller. My original business partner, his grandfather was Robert Miller. He might try to use that name similarity to create confusion at the bank to imply some kind of generational claim. That's a good point, David said. He could try to argue he was accessing what he believed to be a family account. It's a weak argument, but we need to neutralize it. Here is what we will do. First, you will go to the bank alone. You will empty the contents of that box and transfer them to a new box under the name of the Jefferson Family Trust. Only you will have access to that. Second, you will place your bait documents in the original box. Third, and this is crucial, I will call the bank manager, Mr. Peterson. You've known him for years, correct? Since his first day as a teller? I confirmed. Good. I will inform him that you have concerns about unauthorized access attempts on your account by a third party. I won't name Chad, but I will clarify the specific names on the box and instruct him to be on high alert. If anyone other than you attempts to access that box, they are to be detained and questioned. Chad's actions of his own free will constitute attempted fraud. He'll be caught in his own lie with no legal recourse. A feeling of relief washed over me. My instincts had been right, but David had provided the legal fortress to surround them. My plan was no longer just a father's desperate gambit. It was now a sound legal strategy. Thank you, David. I said the words carrying the weight of decades of trust. Just be careful, Silas, he warned. You are playing a dangerous game. I know, I said, my gaze falling on a photograph of Rose on my desk. But some things are worth fighting for. With the legal groundwork laid, the next phase of my plan began. This part required not a lawyer's mind, but an engineer's hands. That afternoon, I unboxed the device I had ordered online with next-day delivery. It was a marvel of modern technology, a high-definition camera so small the lens was no larger than the head of a pin. In my day, surveillance equipment was bulky and obvious. Now it was nearly invisible. A perfect tool for a quiet war. I took the device into my bedroom. For a moment, I stood in the center of the room, looking around at this space that had been my sanctuary for nearly 50 years. This was where I had slept beside Rose every night. This was where Amara had crawled into bed with us during thunderstorms. It was a place of peace, of vulnerability, of absolute trust. And I was about to turn it into a theater of betrayal. A profound sadness settled in my chest. I felt like I was desecrating a sacred place. But the feeling passed, replaced by the cold necessity of the task at hand. This was no longer just a bedroom. It was a work site. And the job was to build a perfect trap. My eyes scanned the room, not as a resident, but as a surveyor. I considered the angles, the lines of sight. The target was the nightstand by my bed. The point of entry was the doorway. Chad would be quiet. He would use the dim light from the hallway or his phone. I needed a vantage point that was unobstructed, elevated, and utterly beyond suspicion. My gaze drifted upward and settled on the smoke detector, a simple white disc centered on the ceiling. It was perfect. No one ever looks at a smoke detector. It is designed to be ignored until it screams. I didn't rush. I went to my workshop in the garage, the place where I still tinkered with old clocks and repaired furniture. I gathered my tools, laying them out carefully on a soft cloth on my bed. Not a rusty screwdriver from a kitchen drawer, but my precision toolkit, a set of jeweler's screwdrivers, a pair of delicate forceps, a variable speed Dremel with a pin-sized drill bit, and a pair of wire strippers. These were the tools of a craftsman, an extension of my own hands. I placed a small, sturdy stepladder beneath the smoke detector. As I climbed, my movements were slow, but they were not the movements of a frail old man. They were the deliberate economic movements of someone who has spent a lifetime respecting heights and handling tools. There was no tremble in my hands as I carefully twisted the cover off the detector. Inside was a simple circuit board and a 9-volt battery connection. Amateurs would have tried to hide a battery-powered camera inside one that would die in a matter of hours. That was not my plan. I had chosen a camera that could be wired into a low-voltage power source. Using the forceps, I gently disconnected the existing wiring. My hands, wrinkled and scarred from a lifetime of hard labor, were surprisingly nimble as they worked with the tiny, delicate components. I selected the smallest drill bit and with the quiet hum of the Dremel bored a single perfectly centered hole through the plastic casing no wider than a pencil lead. It was invisible from the floor. Then came the delicate part. I threaded the camera's minuscule wires through the casing and spliced them directly into the detector's own power leads. It was a simple trick for anyone who understood basic electronics. The camera would now have a constant, uninterrupted power supply. It would never run out of batteries. It would be a silent, sleepless eye watching and waiting for as long as I needed it to. I fitted the tiny camera lens into the hole I had drilled. It sat flush with the plastic, indistinguishable from a tiny molding imperfection. Before closing it up, I pulled out my phone and synced it with the camera's secure, encrypted feed. The screen flickered to life, showing me my own room from a god's eye view. The image was crystal clear. I could see the grain of the wood on my nightstand, the title of the book resting on it, the very weave of the quilt on my bed. I got down from the ladder and walked the path Chad would take from the door to the nightstand. I watched myself on the screen. There were no blind spots. The vantage point was perfect. It would capture everything. With the test complete, I climbed the ladder one last time and carefully twisted the cover back into place. It clicked shut with a soft finality. I stepped back and looked up. It was just a smoke detector again. A benign, necessary object hanging silently from the ceiling. But now it was my witness. It was my truth detector. I cleaned up my tools, leaving no dust, no stray wires, no evidence of my work. The bedroom was as it had been, but everything had changed. It was no longer just a sanctuary of the past. It was now a fortress, waiting patiently for the siege to begin. The following morning, I did not dress in the comfortable slacks and polo shirt of a retiree. I put on a dark gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that Rose had given me for our 40th anniversary. I was not a man puttering around his house today. I was the chairman of Jefferson Construction, and I was going to a business meeting. The drive downtown to the main branch of the Atlanta Trust Bank was filled with a heavy silence. Every traffic light, every turn was a moment for reflection. I was about to open a time capsule of my life with Rose, only to dismantle it to protect it from the greed that had now infected my family. It was a necessary profanity, and the weight of it settled on my shoulders. I didn't wait in the main line. I had an appointment with the branch manager, James Peterson. He was a man in his early 40s with a sharp suit and a respectful demeanor. I had known him since he was a young teller with aspirations, and I had watched him climb the ladder. He greeted me at the door of his office with a firm handshake. "Silas, it's good to see you, but I'm sorry for the circumstances," he said, his expression serious. "David Hayes called me yesterday. He explained that you required our full discretion and assistance with a sensitive account matter. Consider it done. Whatever you need, we are here to support you." "Thank you, James. I appreciate that more than you know," I replied. There was an unspoken understanding between us. In a city like Atlanta, a man like me didn't build a reputation over 50 years without creating a network of mutual respect. James knew I was not a man given to drama or frivolity. If I was here with my lawyer involved, the matter was serious. A bank employee quietly escorted me to the vault. The great circular steel door, polished to a mirror shine, swung open with a near-silent hiss. We walked into the cold, quiet air of the vault, a room that smelled of old paper and cold steel. It was a library of secrets and fortunes held in thousands of anonymous metal boxes. I was led to a small private viewing room, and a moment later the employee returned carrying the long, heavy safe deposit box numbered 347. My box. He placed it on the table and left, closing the door softly behind him. I stared at the box for a long moment. It was cold to the touch. Rose and I had opened this account the year after my company finally turned a stable profit. We had sat in a room just like this one, our hands trembling slightly as we placed the first stock certificates inside proof of a future we had barely dared to dream of. With a deep breath, I inserted the key and turned. The lock clicked open with a sharp metallic sound. I lifted the heavy lid. On top of the stacks of manila envelopes and folded documents was a small faded photograph of Amara at her 5th birthday party, a chocolate smudge on her cheek and a paper crown perched crookedly on her head. A wave of memory washed over me so powerful it almost buckled my knees. The pain was sharp and real. This box wasn't just a collection of assets. It was the physical manifestation of my life's purpose to build a world of safety and opportunity for my family. But there was no time for sentiment. I worked with the efficiency of an engineer on a deadline. I carefully lifted out every document. Stock certificates for companies I had invested in decades ago. The original notarized deeds to 3 properties, including the land on which my own house stood. U.S. Treasury bonds tucked into a crisp envelope. My military discharge papers, Rose's will. My life's work, a tangible history of risk and reward, lay on the table before me. I sorted them into a neat pile. Then from my briefcase, I removed the items for the new box and the single thick envelope David Hayes had prepared for me. I took the new, clean, safe deposit box that had been brought for me and began to fill it. I placed every valuable document from the old box into the new one. This was the fortress. This was the treasure now moved to a new, unassailable location under the name of the Jefferson Family Trust. When I was finished, I was left with the old box number 347. It was now empty, save for the faded photograph of my daughter. I picked up the photo, looked at it one last time, and slipped it into my suit pocket close to my heart. It did not belong in the trap. Then I took the thick bait envelope, the one addressed to Chad Miller, and placed it in the center of the now empty metal box. It lay there, solitary and significant. It was a bomb waiting for a greedy hand to arm it. I closed the lid. The click of the lock sounded like a final, irreversible decision. I left the viewing room and returned both boxes to the employee. In Mr. Peterson's office, he signed the paperwork for the new account. I slid the new key across his desk. "James," I said, "please place this in the main bank vault. Access only by me in your presence." "Of course, Silas," he said, securing the key in a numbered envelope. I stood up to leave the old key, the key to the trap now feeling heavy and strange in my pocket. At the door, I turned. "Thank you for your discretion, James." He looked me straight in the eye, his expression unwavering. "You've been a pillar of this community for 50 years, Silas. We protect our own." As I walked out of the bank and into the bright Atlanta sun, I did not feel relief. I felt a grim, steely sense of accomplishment. The physical trap was set. The bait was in place. The silent witness in my bedroom was watching. Now the waiting would begin. I worked in the cold, sterile silence of the bank's viewing room, the fortress I was building taking its final shape. With the true legacy of my life's work secured in a new, untouchable vault, my attention turned to the old box number 347. It sat on the table before me, empty and hollowed out a metal shell waiting for a new poisonous purpose. From my leather briefcase, I withdrew a thick manila envelope. It was not the one David Hayes had prepared. This was one I had prepared myself, a final personal touch to the proceedings. From a separate folder, I took out the documents. They were not the originals with their brittle yellowed paper and faded ink. I would never risk those. These were crisp, high-quality copies, the kind used for legal filings, the black ink stark against the clean white paper. I laid them out on the cool metal of the table, a timeline of betrayal printed in monochrome. The first document was a copy of the land deed from 1975. The names at the bottom were clear as day: Silas T. Jefferson, Robert L. Miller. Seeing his name next to mine, even after all these years, sent a faint, cold echo through me. 2 soldiers, 2 brothers, 2 partners, whose bond had been dissolved by the universal acid of greed. The second document was the court's judgment from 1978. Page after page of legal language that all boiled down to one simple, brutal fact: Robert Miller had committed fraud in his attempt to cut me out of the deal, and as a result, the court had awarded me sole and undisputed ownership of the land. It was the story of a victory that had always felt more like a scar. These documents were the facts, they were the history, but they lacked a soul. The final piece of the trap had to be personal. From the inside pocket of my suit jacket, I took out a single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery and my old fountain pen, the one Rose had given me when I first opened my office. The pen felt cool and familiar in my hand. Its nib was perfectly worn, moving across the paper with a soft scratching sound that was the only noise in the room. My handwriting was as it had always been, the neat, precise block lettering of an engineer, each letter formed with care and intention. I wrote only a few short lines. I did not need a long letter to say what needed to be said. I chose each word with the care of a demolition expert placing a charge. When I was finished, I read the note over, once my face impassive. Then I folded the heavy paper in half with a sharp crease. I slipped the note inside the envelope, placing it on top of the legal documents. I sealed the flap, pressing down firmly, leaving no doubt that it was meant to be opened only by its intended recipient. I picked up my pen one last time and wrote on the front of the envelope in the same clear, strong letters, "For Chad Miller." I then placed the sealed envelope into the center of the cold, empty safe deposit box. It lay there looking small and harmless, but I knew it was filled with a truth more explosive than any dynamite. I closed the heavy lid. The metallic click of the lock echoed in the silent room, a sound of absolute finality. The trap was now complete. For 3 nights I waited. The trap was set. The house was quiet, and the silent eye in my bedroom kept its vigil. I would lie in my bed feigning sleep while watching the live feed from the camera on my phone, the screen hidden under my blanket. I watched the shadows lengthen and shorten in my empty room. I watched dust motes dance in the moonlight. The waiting was a unique kind of torture, a slow-burning tension that tightened in my chest with every passing hour. I knew he would come. Greed is not a patient emotion. On the 4th night, it happened. Just after 2 in the morning, the time when sleep is deepest, the screen on my phone showed a change. A thin sliver of light appeared as my bedroom door creaked open inch by silent inch. A figure slipped inside a shadow against the dim light of the hallway. It was him. From my vantage point on the screen, I watched him stand motionless by the door for a full minute, listening. I could imagine the sound of my own slow, steady breathing, a performance of sleep I had been practicing. Satisfied, he moved into the room. He didn't use a flashlight. Instead, he used the weak, ghoulish glow of his own phone screen to navigate. It cast strange, dancing shadows on his face, illuminating him from below. The camera, with its crisp night vision, saw him perfectly. It saw the thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. It saw the mixture of fear and determination in his eyes. He moved with a thief's practiced stealth, his feet making no sound on the old hardwood floor. He reached the nightstand. My nightstand, the one I had built with Rose the first year we were married. The camera recorded the slight hesitation in his hand as he reached for the drawer pull. He shot a quick, nervous glance at the large lump in the bed where he thought I was sleeping peacefully, oblivious. Then, with infinite slowness, he pulled the drawer open. The old wood made a soft, groaning sound, a sound that in the dead silence of the room must have sounded like a scream to him. He froze, waiting, but I did not stir. The camera had a perfect, unobstructed view into the drawer. He angled his phone to see inside, his eyes immediately fixed on the 2 objects lying there, the single, shiny key to the safe deposit box, and beside it the dull, tarnished metal of my old dog tags. He reached in his fingers, closing around them both. He lifted them into the faint light. The camera was so clear I could see the reflection of his phone screen in the surface of the key. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. He looked at the dog tags. I watched his face, this man who had married my only child, as he processed what he was seeing. I saw his brow furrow in concentration as he read the first name, Silas T. Jefferson. Then I saw his eyes shift to the second tag, the one I had placed directly beneath my own. The camera captured the exact moment the information registered. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. The confident greed on his face dissolved, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. He mouthed the name, a silent word on the screen, Robert L. Miller. He stared at the tags for what felt like an eternity. He looked from the name on the metal to the sleeping form in the bed, then back to the name. He was a man whose simple plan, Rob the old man, had just collided with an impossible piece of history. The camera, of course, couldn't record his thoughts, but his face told the story. It was a storm of warring emotions. The greed that had brought him here was now fighting a tidal wave of confusion. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. For a long moment I thought he might turn back. I saw the doubt, the fear. He held a piece of a puzzle he didn't even know existed, and it unnerved him. But then I saw the shift. His expression hardened, his jaw tightened. The confusion was pushed down, suppressed by the stronger, more primal urge that had driven him from the start. Greed won. He made a decision. He carefully placed the dog tags back in the open drawer. The past was a mystery he couldn't solve, and he didn't have time for it. But the key was the future. It was tangible. It was the answer to his problems. He curled his fingers around the key, and his hand slipped into his pocket. He closed the drawer, gave one last long look at my bed, and then, as silently as he had entered, He slipped out of the room and closed the door behind him. I lay in the dark watching the footage one more time on my phone. I had it. The final, undeniable proof. There was no pity in my heart, only the cold, hard certainty of a trap that had just been armed by its intended victim. The next morning, the sun rose on what Chad Miller believed was the first day of his new life. As I later learned from a heartbroken Amara, he was a different man. The cloud of stress and anxiety that had been hanging over him for months had vanished, replaced by an unnerving electric confidence. He woke up early whistling as he put on his best suit. When Amara came into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, he was already dressed, knotting his tie with a flourish. "You're up early," she said, smiling, "and looking very handsome. Big day at the dealership." He turned and gave her a kiss, a deep and theatrical kiss that was a performance of a loving, successful husband. "The biggest," he said, his voice buzzing with energy. "Honey, you're not going to believe this. That corporate client from Charlotte, the one I've been chasing for 6 months, his assistant just called. He flew in last night unexpectedly, and he wants to meet this morning to finalize a fleet deal, a massive one. This could be it, Amara. This could be the deal that clears all our debts and sets us up for good." The lie was flawless. It was specific, believable, and perfectly tailored to her hopes and dreams for him. I can picture my daughter's face, her eyes lighting up with pride and relief. "Oh, Chad, that's wonderful. I knew you could do it." She was his biggest cheerleader, his most loyal believer, and he used that beautiful, trusting heart of hers as a cover for his crimes. While she busied herself making him a celebratory cup of coffee, he grabbed his briefcase, the key to box 347, now nestled securely in an inner pocket. He gave her one last kiss at the door. "Wish me luck," he said. "You don't need it," she replied, beaming. "You're a star." As he walked out of their apartment and into the bright morning sun, he must have felt invincible. I can see him in my mind's eye striding to his polished, expensive car, a car he was probably months behind on payments for. As he drove through the streets of Atlanta, the city must have looked like his kingdom. He was the master of the universe. He had outsmarted the old man. He had seen an opportunity and seized it with both hands. He was probably already spending the money in his head, imagining the look on the faces of the creditors who had been hounding him. He wasn't just getting out of debt, he was getting revenge on a world he felt had underestimated him. He likely thought of me with a kind of smug pity. Poor old Silas, a relic from another time, too sentimental and too slow to see the modern world for what it was. He had no idea that the past he so casually dismissed was about to rise up and swallow him whole. He felt like a king driving to his coronation. He had no idea he was a lamb driving to the slaughter. Every confident thought that crossed his mind was a lie. Every mile he drove was a mile deeper into a maze designed just for him. The upbeat music he was likely blasting from his speakers was a soundtrack to his own ruin. He finally pulled up in front of the Atlanta Trust Bank, its stone facade and tall columns gleaming in the morning light. It was a temple of money and power, and he felt he was finally ready to enter and take his rightful place inside. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, straightening his tie, smoothing his hair. He adjusted his expression into one of quiet, confident wealth, the look of a man who belonged in a place like this. He got out of the car and walked with a purposeful stride toward the grand bronze doors. He was not a thief skulking in the shadows. He was Chad Miller, a man on the rise, a man about to claim his fortune. He walked into that bank believing he was the smartest man in Atlanta. He was about to learn in the most permanent way possible that he was wrong. He pushed through those heavy bronze doors and stepped into the cool marble sanctuary of the Atlanta Trust Bank. I can picture him pausing for a moment, letting the atmosphere of old money and quiet power wash over him. To him, this was not a place of business. It was the finish line. The lobby was hushed, the only sounds being the soft tapping of keyboards and the distant muffled ring of a telephone. He walked across the polished floor, his expensive shoes clicking with a confidence he did not truly own, and took his place in line. He looked for all the world like a man who belonged there. When he reached the teller's window, he produced a charming, easy smile. It was the same smile he used to sell cars, the one he had used to win my daughter's heart. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth and friendly. "I'm here to access a safe deposit box. Number 347. He placed the key on the counter with a soft clink. The teller, a professional woman with a neutral expression, took the key. "Of course, sir. May I see your ID?" Chad slid his driver's license across the counter. Certainly. Chad Miller. I can imagine the scene as the teller typed the information into her computer. Her polite smile never wavered, but her eyes would have seen the flag on the account, the note from her manager. Just one moment, sir, she would have said. The primary name on this box is Jefferson. The original co-signer was a Robert Miller. Chad was prepared for this. He leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice. That's right. Robert Miller was my grandfather. Silas Jefferson is my father-in-law. He's getting on in years and isn't feeling well today. He's asked me to come down and retrieve some important documents for him. The lie was plausible, wrapped in a believable story of family duty. The teller simply nodded. I understand, sir. As this is a slightly unusual access request, I'll just need to get the branch manager to assist you. Please have a seat. It will only be a moment. For a split second, a flicker of panic must have crossed Chad's face. The manager. Was this a complication? But before the fear could take root, Mr. James Peterson emerged from his office, his hand extended, a professional, welcoming smile on his face. Mr. Miller James Peterson, it's a pleasure. We've been expecting you. Please write this way. We'll get this sorted for you immediately. That single phrase, we've been expecting you, must have felt like a validation. Of course they were expecting him. He was an important man handling an important transaction. His brief flicker of fear vanished, replaced by a surge of renewed arrogance. He followed Mr. Peterson, his stride confident once more. He was being given the VIP treatment. They walked across the lobby, their footsteps echoing in the high-ceilinged space. They passed through a heavy gate of wrought iron and stood before the vault itself. The door was a magnificent thing, a foot of polished steel and intricate locking mechanisms. For Chad, it was a gateway to his dreams. With a series of quiet, powerful clicks, Mr. Peterson and another employee unlocked and swung the massive door open. Chad stepped into the cold, climate-controlled air of the vault. The silence in here was different. It was absolute, the kind of silence that absorbs all sound. Rows upon rows of identical numbered metal boxes lined the walls, a silent testament to the city's hidden wealth. An employee in a crisp uniform took the key, consulted a ledger, and walked down one of the aisles. There was a soft, metallic scrape as he located and slid box 347 from its slot. He handed the box to Chad. It felt heavy in his hands, substantial. He could feel the imagined weight of stock certificates and bearer bonds, the dense reality of a fortune. It was everything he had dreamed of. The first viewing room on the left is available, Mr. Miller, Mr. Peterson said politely. Take all the time you need. The door to the small, wood-paneled room clicked shut behind him, leaving him in complete privacy. He placed the box on the polished table. For a moment, he just stared at it, his own reflection looking back at him from the smooth metal surface. His heart was hammering in his chest. His palms were sweating. This was it. The culmination of his plans, the solution to all his problems, the beginning of his real life. He took a deep, shaky breath, the air tasting of victory. He reached into his pocket and took out the key. His hand trembled slightly as he fitted it into the lock. It slid in with a smooth, satisfying precision. He gripped the head of the key, his knuckles white. Everything he wanted in the world was just a single motion away. He took one last look around the silent room, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Then he turned the key. A loud, definitive click echoed in the small room, a sound that sealed his fate forever. With the key turned, the final barrier was gone. I can see him in that silent room, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. This was the moment. He lifted the heavy steel lid, his eyes wide with anticipation, ready to feast on the treasure trove that would solve all his problems. And then his grin vanished. His face fell, the confidence draining away like water through a sieve. The box was empty. Cavernously, insultingly empty. There were no stacks of cash, no thick envelopes of bonds, no stock certificates. All he saw lying in the center of the cold, bare metal was a single, plain manila envelope. For a moment he simply stared, his mind refusing to process the scene. Was this a joke? A test? Where was the money? His confusion quickly curdled into a hot, frustrated anger. He snatched the envelope from the box, his movements now rough and impatient. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps the envelope held account numbers, a deed to a hidden property, the real key. He tore it open with a savage rip, not bothering with the clasp. A few sheets of paper spilled onto the polished table. He grabbed the first one. It was a copy of the land deed from 1975. He scanned it, his eyes finding his grandfather's name, Robert Miller, next to mine. He frowned, shaking his head. What was this? Some useless piece of ancient history? Where was the fortune? He tossed it aside and grabbed the next document. This one was different. It was a court judgment dense with legal text. His eyes darted across the page, snagging on words that made his blood run cold. Words like fraudulent misrepresentation, breach of contract, and then the final devastating phrase, sole ownership of the property in question is hereby awarded to the plaintiff, Mr. Silas T. Jefferson. A sick, dawning horror began to creep into his expression. He didn't understand the whole story, not yet, but he understood that he had just stumbled into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple robbery. Then his eyes fell on the last item, the single sheet of cream-colored stationery. He picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. He read the few lines I had written for him, the words I had chosen so carefully. Looking for your inheritance, son. You're robbing the wrong man. And you're looking in the wrong place. Your grandfather's fortune was lost the day he tried to steal mine. The transformation was absolute. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. The document slipped from his numb fingers, scattering across the table. A small, choked sound escaped his throat. He stumbled backwards, slumping into the chair behind him. It all crashed down on him in that one terrible moment. There was no money. There was never going to be any money. He hadn't just failed. He had been lured into a trap. A trap that had been waiting for him, for his name, for his greed, for half a century. He wasn't a master thief on the verge of victory. He was just the latest fool in a long family line of them. And just as that devastating reality was settling in, the door to the viewing room opened without a knock. Mr. Peterson, the bank manager, stood in the doorway. He was no longer smiling. His face was a mask of grim professional authority. Behind him, flanking the doorway, were two uniformed security guards. Mr. Peterson's voice was calm, but it cut through the silence like a shard of ice. Mr. Miller, there appears to be a serious irregularity with your attempt to access this account. I'm afraid you'll have to come with us. That evening, my living room, usually a place of warmth and comfort, felt as cold and sterile as the bank's vault. The air was thick with unspoken words, heavy with a tension so profound it was almost difficult to breathe. I had called them an hour earlier. My voice over the phone had been calm, measured, and unyielding. Amara, I had said, I need you and Chad to come to the house immediately. There's a serious family matter we must discuss. I offered no explanation, and I refused to answer her frantic questions. When they arrived, the contrast between them was devastating. My daughter Amara rushed in first, her face etched with worry and confusion. Her eyes darted between me sitting calmly in my armchair and her husband. Dad, what's going on? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Chad told me there was some terrible misunderstanding at the bank. He's so shaken up. Please, whatever this is, can't we just talk it through? She was trying to be the peacemaker to smooth over a crack that she could not possibly comprehend was a chasm. Chad followed her in like a man being led to his own execution. His arrogant swagger was gone, evaporated. His expensive suit now looked like a costume on a broken mannequin. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He couldn't meet my gaze. His eyes were fixed on the floor as if searching for a hole to swallow him whole. He didn't say a word, just sank into the chair furthest from me, a silent, hollowed-out shell of the man who had walked so confidently into the bank that morning. His silence was his confession. I let that silence stretch, letting it press down on both of them. I let Amara's anxious questions hang unanswered in the air. I wanted them to feel the full weight of the moment before the first blow fell. The only sound in the room was the slow, rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner, a sound that had measured out the peaceful moments of my life for 50 years. Tonight, it sounded like a countdown to an explosion. Dad, please, Amara whispered, her hand reaching for Chad's, but he didn't seem to notice. You're scaring me. Don't. I finally looked at her, my expression calm, but my heart breaking for the pain I was about to cause her. It was a necessary pain, the sharp, clean pain of a surgeon's knife meant to save a life, not to wound it. I'm not trying to scare you, honey, I said, my voice low and even. I am trying to show you the truth. All I ask is that you watch and you listen. Then we can talk. I picked up the television remote from the table beside me. The small plastic object felt unnaturally heavy in my hand. It was the key to the final lock, the trigger for the final act. Chad looked up at the dark screen of the television, a flicker of pure animal terror in his eyes. He knew what was coming. Amara just looked at me, her face a mask of bewildered innocence. The contrast was a tragedy. I aimed the remote, and with a soft click, the screen came to life. The screen flickered to life, not with a news channel or a movie, but with a strange, high-angle black and white image. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight coming through a window. Amara squinted at the screen, her head tilted in confusion. "Dad, what is this?" she whispered. "Is this some kind of old security tape?" Chad said nothing. He seemed to shrink in his chair, his face ashen, his eyes glued to the screen in horrified fascination. Then on the television, a door handle turned with agonizing slowness. The door to my bedroom opened. A figure slipped in. That's your room," Amara said, her voice barely audible. She recognized the figure, the familiar build and gait. "Chad, what are you doing?" She looked from the screen to the real Chad, who sat frozen beside her, a living statue of guilt. She was still searching for an innocent explanation. Maybe he had been checking on me. Maybe he had left his phone charger. Her mind was clinging desperately to the image of the man she thought she had married. On the screen, her husband moved with a stealth she had never seen before. He crept across the floor toward the nightstand. I watched my daughter's face. I saw the moment her desperate hope for a simple explanation began to die. It was when she watched his hand, her husband's hand, reach out and slowly, deliberately pull open the drawer of my nightstand. A small gasp escaped her lips. Her own hand flew to her mouth as if to stifle a cry. This was not the action of a man checking on his father-in-law. This was the action of a thief. The silent, grainy figure on the screen rummaged for a moment before pulling out the key and the dog tags. Amara leaned forward, her eyes wide, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. The on-screen Chad looked at the tags, a flicker of confusion crossing his face even on the low-resolution video. But then, with a decisiveness that was chilling to watch, he pocketed the key. A crime clean and undeniable had just been committed on the screen in front of her. But in the living room, a heart was being shattered. I saw the exact moment the love in my daughter's eyes was replaced by a look of utter soul-crushing devastation. The man she had built her life with, the man she had defended just minutes ago, the man she loved was a liar and a thief. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it left no room for anger, only a vast, empty canyon of pain. Tears began to well up in her eyes, but she did not make a sound. They spilled over, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. It was the quiet, profound grief of a world ending. She was no longer watching the screen. Her gaze was fixed on some distant point in the empty air in front of her, as if she was watching the entire history of her marriage replay in her mind, now tainted by this single unforgivable truth. Every shared laugh, every promise, every moment of intimacy was now a lie. On the television, the video version of Chad silently closed the drawer and slipped out of the room, leaving no trace of his crime except for the damning record of it. The screen went black. The only sound in the room was the steady, merciless ticking of the grandfather clock and the sound of my daughter's silent, heartbroken sobs. The evidence had been presented. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrible than any accusation I could ever have made. It was a silence filled with the wreckage of my daughter's shattered heart. I let the screen stay black for a long moment, letting the silence in the room become a physical presence. Amara was still crying, those quiet, devastating tears of a world undone. Chad sat like a stone, his face a hollow mask. I turned my gaze from the television to my daughter, and I began to speak. My voice was not loud, it was not angry. It was calm, measured, and as heavy as the 50 years of history it was about to unburden. "Amara," I began speaking to her, but making sure Chad heard every single word. "What you just saw on that screen, that isn't the beginning of this story. It's the end of one. A story that started long before you were born, in a place a world away from here." I looked at Chad, truly looked at him for the first time that evening. "It started in the jungles of Vietnam. Your grandfather, Robert Miller, and I were kids. We were dropped into a hell that neither of us understood, and all we had was each other. We weren't black or white in that jungle. We were just two boys from Atlanta trying to keep each other alive. We shared our food, our ammunition, and our dreams. And we made a promise. We swore on the graves of the friends we lost that if we made it back home, we would build something together. Something real. Something that would last. I leaned forward in my chair. And we did it. When we got back, we pooled every penny we had saved from our combat pay. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We bought 50 acres of red clay and pine trees way north of the city. Everyone, including my own family, thought I was a fool. It was nothing back then. Just farmland. Nobody wanted a place where you could hear the crickets at night. But Robert and I, we saw the future. We saw the city expanding, and we knew that one day that worthless piece of dirt would be worth something. Amara looked up. Her tears momentarily forgotten, confused by this story she had never heard. Your grandfather, Chad, he was the one who handled the final paperwork with the county clerk. I continued, my voice as steady as concrete. He was the white partner. It was easier that way back then. He came to me a week later, his face all long and sad, and he told me the deal had fallen through. He said the seller backed out, that our money was lost in legal fees. He shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and told me, "Tough break, Silas. We'll get 'em next time." He lied to my face. What I didn't know was that the deal hadn't fallen through at all. The deed had been filed. Only my name wasn't on it. He thought it was the perfect crime. This was Georgia in the 1970s. Who would take a black man's word over a decorated white sergeant's? He was counting on me to just roll over and accept it. He was counting on the world being just as ugly and unfair as he was. But he made a mistake. He underestimated me. And he underestimated a brilliant, fearless young lawyer named Franklin Hayes who believed the law should be blind. We took your grandfather to court. It was a long, ugly fight. He slandered my name. He had his friends lie on the stand. But we had something he didn't. We had the truth. We had my bank receipts showing my half of the payment. We had letters he had written me from Vietnam, letters filled with our plans for that very piece of land. And in the end, the truth won. The court found that Robert Miller had committed fraud. They stripped him of his claim and awarded me sole legal ownership of all 50 acres. I paused, letting that sink in. I could see Chad's mind struggling to connect the dots, still not understanding the true scale of the story. And here, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is the part of the story your family chose to forget. Here is the secret that has been rotting at the core of the Miller family for 2 generations. That worthless piece of land, that red clay and pine scrub that your grandfather tried to steal from me. Do you have any idea where it is? I let the question hang in the air for a heartbeat before I delivered the final crushing blow. It's the 4-block stretch of Peachtree Road that runs from Phipps Plaza past Lenox Square. The ground underneath those glass and steel skyscrapers, underneath those designer boutiques where your wife likes to shop, underneath the very heart of modern Buckhead. That was our land. Your grandfather didn't just try to steal 50 acres of dirt from me, Chad. He tried to steal the future. He tried to steal one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the entire American South. The color, what little was left of it, drained completely from Chad's face. Amara let out a soft, strangled gasp, her hand covering her mouth again, but this time in utter disbelief. His greed and his prejudice. I concluded, my voice now like the tolling of a great bell. It cost your family everything. He lost the land, he was disgraced, and he spent the rest of his life drowning in bitterness and debt, passing that poisonous legacy of failure and resentment down to his son, and then down to you. My family, on the other hand, built its entire foundation on the land he threw away. Everything I have, Amara, this house, your education, the trust fund that will keep you secure for the rest of your life, it all grew from that piece of red clay. The fortune you were looking for in my nightstand drawer, Chad, was a ghost. You didn't come here tonight to rob a feeble old man. You came here to rob the memory of your own family's lost kingdom. And just like your grandfather, you failed. When my story was finally told, the silence that fell upon the room was different. It was not the tense, anxious silence of before. It was the vast, empty silence that follows a great and terrible storm, a silence filled with the wreckage of what has been destroyed. Chad sat utterly broken, a man hollowed out by the truth. But my eyes were on my daughter. Amara's silent tears had stopped. She slowly lifted her head, and the look on her face was one I had never seen before. The heartbroken confusion was gone. In its place was a cold, clear, and devastating understanding. She had been given the answer to a question she never even knew she should be asking, and that answer had changed everything. She looked at the man beside her not as her husband, but as a stranger, a ghost continuing a pathetic family legacy of greed and failure. She did not scream, she did not yell or curse him. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and filled with a grace that was heartbreaking to watch. She looked down at her left hand at the diamond engagement ring that had once been her greatest joy. Now it was a symbol of a grand deception, a glittering lie. With a quiet, steady purpose, she began to twist the ring off her finger. It caught for a moment on her knuckle, a final futile resistance. Then it came free. She didn't throw it, she didn't drop it. She reached forward and placed the ring gently on the polished wood of the coffee table that separated them. In the dead quiet of the room, the sound of the small piece of metal and stone touching the wood was as loud and final as a gunshot. A soft, definitive clink. A sound that ended a marriage. A sound that ended a lie. Then she looked at Chad. Her eyes were not filled with hatred, but with a bottomless, sorrowful disappointment that was far more damning. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not much more than a whisper, but it carried the unshakable weight of her decision. "I think you should go now, Chad." That was all. No accusations, no recriminations, just a quiet dismissal. In that moment, she was no longer my little girl who needed protecting. She was a woman as strong as her grandmother, as strong as the steel and concrete foundations of this very house. My heart ached for the terrible pain that had brought her to this point, but it swelled with a fierce pride at the strength she had found in the ruins. The truth had cost her the life she thought she had, but it had given her back the one thing Chad's lies had tried to steal herself. Chad finally lifted his head from his hands. He looked at me, his eyes empty and hollow, braced for the final expected blow. He was waiting for me to call the police, to tell him I was pressing charges, to threaten him with the ruin he so thoroughly deserved. He was waiting for a punishment he could understand. I decided to give him one he would never be able to escape. I looked at this broken man, this echo of his grandfather's failure, and I spoke, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a cold and final clarity. "I'm not going to call the police, Chad. The bank will handle their fraud complaint as they see fit, but I will not be pressing charges for what you did in this house." A flicker of something not hope but confusion passed through his eyes. "Don't mistake my decision for mercy," I continued. "A man like you would do fine in jail. You'd see it as a challenge, another system to try and beat. You would serve your time and come out the same man you are today, filled with the same empty greed. That's not a punishment, it's just a pause. No, your sentence is far more severe. Your punishment is that you have to live with the truth. From this day until the day you die, you have to wake up every morning knowing exactly who you are. You have to know that you are the descendant of a petty, prejudiced thief who threw away a fortune. You have to know that you had the chance to break that cycle, but instead, you repeated his exact pathetic mistake. But worst of all, you have to live for the rest of your life knowing that you held the love of a good and decent woman, my daughter, in your hands, and you threw it all away for nothing, for a ghost. That knowledge, Chad, will be your prison. The truth will be your cellmate, and it will never let you go. Now," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "get out of my house." Chad walked out of the house and out of our lives. He was a ghost, a story we would never tell again. In the months that followed, a quiet healing began. The angry wounds of betrayal slowly scarred over, replaced by a stronger, more honest bond between my daughter and me. One warm autumn afternoon, we sat together on the back porch, the one I had built for Rose so she could watch the hummingbirds. Amara was sketching in a notebook, her expression peaceful and focused for the first time in a long while. She had thrown herself into her work at the gallery, her passion now a source of strength rather than a distraction. "I'm curating a new exhibit," she said softly, not looking up from her page. "I'm calling it Foundations, for artists whose work explores their own hidden histories." She paused, then looked up at me, her eyes clear and steady. "I think I'm finally ready to start exploring mine." I smiled a real genuine smile. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Amara." "I know," she said, a sad but beautiful smile touching her own lips. "I feel like I'm just getting to know her." Looking at my daughter, then I saw not a victim but a survivor. I saw the unshakable strength of her grandmother in her eyes. The greatest treasure I had ever possessed was never locked away in a bank vault. It was right here, sitting with me in the afternoon sun in the garden Rose had planted in the remarkable woman we had raised. I had spent my life building things that were meant to last: houses, a company, a fortune. But in the end, the only foundation that truly mattered was the one I had built with my family. A foundation strong enough to withstand the terrible weight of the truth. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. The most important lesson this ordeal taught me is that the past is never truly buried. Sins and secrets don't just fade away. They seep into the ground and poison the roots of future generations. A fortune built on a forgotten crime is a house built on sand destined to collapse. Chad thought he was chasing a treasure, but he was only chasing the ghost of his grandfather's greed. True inheritance isn't money or property. It's the character and integrity we pass down. That is the only legacy that can never be stolen or lost. If my story has moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories to tell, and your support helps me share them with the world. Click that subscribe button, and you won't miss what's coming next.